SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom for the Nintendo GameCube was a core game from my childhood, and at the time of its release, almost every licensed game was a cash grab, a half-made effort, usually borrowing elements that proved to be successful in other major titles, and filling in the blanks with characters that most kids were familiar with. Despite this, Heavy Iron Studios managed to create a SpongeBob game that didn't just borrow elements from the kings of the platformer collectathon genre, those being Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, and Super Mario Sunshine, but it actually stood on the shoulders of these giants and made quality of life improvements to boot. Now that's not to say that Battle for Bikini Bottom is a masterpiece, or that it's more innovative than any of those previous titles, but there's a reason this game developed a cult following and warranted a re-release nearly 2 decades later, and I think it's important to see how a licensed game can be done so well, since we haven't seen one like Battle for Bikini Bottom, with its heart and charm, since. It's also important to look at its remake, and to see if Purple Lamp Studios successfully paid homage to a game with highly devoted fans, or if they released a cash grab that stands as the antithesis to what the original accomplished. The inherent challenge with designing any collectathon is creating an experience that rarely becomes tedious. A lot of the time, your player will be navigating the same playfield for a lot longer than they would, say, in a traditional platformer. In most classical platformers, you almost never have any reason to stop moving from left to right, so there wasn't really a focus on world building or attention to detail, since it wouldn't really get appreciated. Super Mario 64 has 15 major stages, but 120 stars. Banjo-Kazooie has 9 stages, but 100 Jiggies to collect. Compare that to the 72 stages in Super Mario World, a pretty expansive traditional platformer, and it's clear that the emphasis shifted from a higher overall number of levels to more objectives in the same environment when we went from 2D to 3D. My point is, your player was going to jump into Whomp's Fortress a million times, and hear and see this thing every time, so it needed to be interesting every time, not just something you passed by and forgot immediately. Super Mario 64 had these toads in the castle, and I knew toads had a lot of responsibility in the Mushroom Kingdom, but our only exposure up to this point with them was saying we're at the wrong castle or gambling, so I didn't care. But the castle was a real place, and you could tell the toads really cared about the fact that their princess was gone, and they just wanted to help. 2 of them literally smuggle stars for you to help you defeat Bowser. Yoshi comes back when you get all of the stars. They also had this owl. In Super Mario Sunshine, Delfino Plaza gets brighter, cleaner, and even more livelier as you collect shines. My point is, the world had details, and those details changed as you progressed. That's how you kept the player interested, even though they were seeing the same thing over and over for hours. So how did Battle for Bikini Bottom do it? Well, firstly, they didn't need to reinvent the wheel and take a risk with Hoot the Owl. SpongeBob had a cast that everyone knows, and the developers could simply place references wherever they needed textures, NPCs, bosses, and even all of the stages. I feel like this is a literal layup for any licensed game to implement, and sometimes it's done well, like in The Simpsons Hit and Run, but usually this level of attention to detail is absent in licensed games. I don't think this approach is superior to creating an entirely unique IP and canonical universes with their own lore. I just think if you're going to have the Sponge Wingman for your game sales, the least you could do is throw a bone to the people who enjoyed the series and sprinkle a little pixie dust over some of the elements that are usually mundane afterthoughts in most games. Battle for Bikini Bottom does this well, extremely well. I think most of the game's replayability and charm comes from the constant fan service. See, even though world building to the point that your game never becomes tedious is the main obstacle in designing a game in this genre, it can also pay off huge dividends when it's overcome. Heavy Iron Studios played to their strengths, and it would have been entirely normal to put in a few hours of mediocre gameplay and call it a wrap. Actually, that would have still been above average. But of course they didn't do that. They actually put thought into the gameplay too. They made something with tight and fun movement, an art style representative of the series, objectives that guided you through the well-crafted levels without holding your hand, walking the line between linear and open worlds, puzzles that were challenging but rewarding, not this one. Combat that, while not exactly as complex as Dark Souls, was entertaining and perfectly paced. unique characters that were distinct in movement and combat, and collectibles that struck a perfect balance between mandatory and optional. You can complete this game only collecting the major golden spatulas and skipping the ones you find difficult or can't figure out. But if you want to suck everything you can out of this game, then there's content for you, and it doesn't feel like an afterthought or some side quest thrown in to flesh the game out as an excuse to add to the overall playtime. The dialogue is what you'd expect to find as if this game was an episode of the show.
Can't believe I'm wearing SpongeBob's underwear.
And for the most part, the studio was able to get the actual original voice actors from the series to do their respective characters. The music is... And the game also did this thing that I don't really see often in modern games, where it teases the parts of the game that you don't have access to. Maybe it was because the pamphlets that came with the games would usually show you screenshots of levels later on in the game, and it probably had to do with you being able to see the hub world from beyond the blockade that prevented you from accessing it. There were also usually demos of the game that ran if you sat on the title screen like an arcade game. And these things would always get me excited and instill some sense of wonder and eagerness that would have me at school imagining what those levels would be like once I eventually got to them. These days, everything a game has to offer is exposed in an E3 reveal, or the IGN review, or you watch some video about the game before you play it, and now the wonder's gone. There was Cheat Code Central and GameFAQs when I first played Battle for Bikini Bottom, but those would mostly just give you tips on how to grind shiny objects or find Easter eggs. There's just fewer no way moments in new games. Maybe that's because of everything I just said, or maybe it's because the bar is just higher and everything's getting played out. Or maybe I'm just less naive and easily impressed now. I don't really know, but Battle for Bikini Bottom did a great job at making me feel that sense of wonder as a kid. My main complaints with the original are typical. The boss fights are definitely the weakest point gameplay-wise. They're extremely repetitive and drawn out, and not challenging enough to keep you invested, which can lead to some reckless deaths that set you back to an earlier point in the fight, forcing you to endure even more. It's also well known within the community that the game was originally rushed in development, and that we didn't get every boss fight that was intended for the game. There are only a few major boss fights throughout the game, and they're easy enough to repress, so it shouldn't be a deal breaker. The game is also short if you're decently competent at this sort of game. I was considerably terrible at puzzles when I was younger.
When I got to the parrot shop, so where do I go? Oh, I guess I remember.
So I could never get most of the spatulas in the Murma layer or the kelp forest. Also, while we're on the topic, my CRT back then could really not produce dark visuals that well, so kelp forest was basically unplayable most of the time. The last third of the game kept me occupied for a long time as a kid, but when I played Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, I managed to collect all of the golden spatulas casually in one play session. Now, I'm a Resident Shift fan, so I'm basically a god at this game and can get a world record with my eyes closed, but I feel it's fair to wish this game was longer, even if it's your first time playing it. When Rehydrated was announced, I was of course ecstatic. The original took my childhood and sucked everything out of... wait. It was a hugely nostalgic moment. It was fan service for a game predicated on fan service. I wanted to see how the game would feel considering, from what I understood, they are rebuilding it from mostly scratch. I bought the game immediately upon release and played through it in its entirety not soon after. Obviously, I wanted to relive the experience of playing that game for the first time, but I also wanted to experience the new content that was added to the game. On top of all that, I wanted to see if the game could manage to improve the experience while staying faithful to the original, if that task was too tall of an order, and if this was just another re-release in an ocean of other re-releases. I was skeptical that Greed was responsible for this remake's existence, mostly because the original wasn't exactly the biggest game ever made. I only have one friend who's played the original personally, and although they love it with the same passion I do, I think we're the exception to the rule. If you were also the exception to the rule, you'll be happy to know that Purple Lamp Studios did an exceptional job at staying faithful to the original release. The core game itself is unchanged, and it seems like they invested a lot of energy into perfecting the movement by getting community feedback through beta testing and, now get this, implementing the feedback. Everything there is to like about the original, for the most part, is present in the remake, including this mime outside of the Krusty Krab. The audio is also now stereo, so now the music The updated graphics are what I think justifies purchasing a game you already own or have already played before. Firstly, I don't have a GameCube or Wii set up at my home at any given moment, so having a copy on my PC is amazing. And secondly, the higher resolution, stronger lighting and shaders, and even aspect ratio all make for a more enjoyable experience. They went with a different artistic style when it came to the lighting and textures, but I think that makes sense. SpongeBob is different now. The animation in the series progressed, so it's fitting that the graphics in his games reflect that. This isn't just a re-release for people who've previously touched the title in the early 2000s. It's ideally an entirely new experience for people who never had the opportunity or weren't aware of its existence. It honestly seemed like a safe bet, and it obviously paid off considering it won an award from Steam for Outstanding Visual Style, though they did say that this was due to there being no Longest Game Title Ever award for them. The new stylistic choices are to be appreciated. The game looks beautiful, and you should need nothing more than this disembodied floating Squidward head in all of its high-resolution glory to see that. Aside from what we knew was good already, and what wasn't broken, and thus not fixed, and the new gorgeous visuals, what we're left with to appreciate is, of course, the new content. The game features a multiplayer mode. It's a fight against Robot Squidward, who was supposed to make it into the original as another boss battle, but was cut due to the game needing to meet its deadline. The mode has been criticized as not being enough. It really does feel like an afterthought, since it really doesn't implement anything about Robot Squidward at all. It's just fighting waves of other robots that he sends at you, and if you pass them all, he just falls apart. As I said earlier, the combat is satisfying, but it isn't Tekken we're talking about here, so I don't really see the appeal in a mode entirely dedicated to it. I still think the mode is a net positive to Rehydrated's release, and I'd rather have it in the game than have it be taken out or not developed in the first place. This is extra content that wasn't mandatory, so it's a nice treat, but please, don't buy the game for this mode. While we're all pointing fingers and criticizing here, I think it's time to address the issues with Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Let's start with minor things that aren't major disappointments. There's lots of tiny bugs that maybe not everyone will experience. I found myself occasionally getting stuck when bouncing off of the goo, getting caught on platforms and having to wait to be freed by an attack, usually tartar sauce. The bubble bowl ability never seems to behave appropriately or go where you want it to, and you have to adjust your aim to account for the wonky physics. Worse than all of this, worse than dying near the end of the industrial park battle and having to start over and wait out all of those attacks again. Worse than him. Worse than everything there is to despise about this game is a bug regarding the stone tiki. When you throw the stone tiki, depending on what it collides with, no matter what you have your sound effects volume set to, it will play at max volume. I notice this occurs with the sound effect that plays when gates open too. If anyone played this game on any other settings than the default, they would have noticed this. I preemptively cringe on behalf of my ears when I have to throw stone tikis onto buttons. It's a painful error, and an unjustifiably easy to prevent one at that. Most of the complaints I've expressed so far could have been prevented with stronger beta testing, which is a surprise considering it seems like they made a lot of improvements to the movement and combat throughout the development. Why did the audio and physics elsewhere not get this sort of attention? I addressed these issues in a Steam review in June of 2020. These issues were all still present in the current release at the time of writing this video. I think it's pretty bad to release a game with bugs like this charging what they did, but I think it's detestable to leave them unaddressed for over half a year. While we're here though, Purple Lamp deserves some praise for addressing the issues they did. The movement on teetering platforms was insanely inaccurate compared to the original on release day. It felt like your jumps were being eaten, and it felt buggy and like an incomplete physics element. Again, I have no idea how this got beyond any beta testing and made it into a full release of the game. The same could be said for slides, specifically exiting them. In the original, it felt really easy to preserve your momentum by jumping off a ramp at the end of a slide. In Rehydrated, however, the timing was much more strict, but it didn't feel like you made a mistake when you missed the window. It felt like your jump was eaten by the game, stolen from you, never to return. I am significantly better at platforming now than when I was 5. I think, at least. And I failed this spatula at the end of Jellyfish Fields way more in Rehydrated than I ever did in the original. However, both of these issues were fixed in an update issued to the game about a month after the game's release. They also fixed 2 major issues that I honestly didn't believe would ever be fixed. Originally, The theater would cost you an insane amount of shiny objects, and only contained measly screenshots of the game you were already playing. There was no Robo Squidward or concept art. The developers added some honestly decent artwork that sort of justifies the price now. They also reduced the cost of Mr. Krabs' golden spatulas, which before, I don't think were worth the mindless and tedious grinding they mandated. I'm shocked these issues were corrected, and I suppose that is a testament to Purple Lamp's devotion to making a truly enjoyable game, reflective of its predecessor's quality. And this throws any notion that this game was created as a cash grab in the trash with the actual cash grabs. Is SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated the antithesis to the original, proving licensed games can genuinely live amongst the greats of a genre and even outdo them in charm and heart? No. Again, I don't think SpongeBob as a series or the original release as a game would carry this remake to financial glory, so I highly doubt this was a cash grab. It's impossible to not be skeptical when the final release contains bugs like it does, but I think the development team had a full plate rebuilding the entire game, and I think they fixed the issues they could. Still, fix the bugs, Purple Lamp Studios. So should you play Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated? If you're a fan of the original, chances are you're a pretty big one, and so I think it's an obvious yes. If you weren't a fan of the original for some reason, well, try it out anyway. You were probably wrong the first time, but if you really know with 100% confidence that you don't like platformer collectathons, then why are you even watching this? And what if you've never touched the original? Is it worth it? I think, again, it's going to be a resounding yes from me, gamers. Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is an enjoyable experience, regardless if you're tripping on nostalgia or anything else, or nothing even. It's just a good game. The charm and heart that sunk its teeth into us as children and never let go won't fail to do the same to you today. Purple Lamp Studios, well done. Fix the bugs, but well done.